The thing that's been going through my mind is, and this is kind of like related to the whole Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, Boring Company story, right? If you think about like the Musk storyline, the thing he's done in really in his entire career has been disrupting industry, right? If you think about that individual, I think you guys tell me if you agree with this. It's like disrupting industry, but before he acquired X, which is very much social, right? It's like it impacts not a professional subset of people; it impacts society. You've gone from an individual that's disrupted autos like cars, that disrupted space, that is disrupting brain chip interfaces and so on and so forth. And what does this disruption mean? It means that he is replacing the old with the new, and that replacement feels, for the people in those changes, it feels very uncomfortable and very like, this is like why are you doing this? Like if we think about all the crazy FUD that was being thrown at Tesla like in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019 was in the spirit of trying to slow this down. But it was like confined to a subset of the population that was more professional in nature, I would say, right? Now with X, the way he's been sort of not only building X to be this, let's call it the free speech platform, but the way he has interfaced with that platform is so unorthodox to what usually happens in this space that it's making a lot of people very uncomfortable. And I think it's up to the individual to decide if it's for the right or wrong reasons, right? And so I'm curious to get y'all's take on that, because that the more I think about this thing, and we had Larry on last week, and poor Larry got freaking dogged by Elon. Even though I think Elon misunderstood the premise of what was being put forth by Larry. But
I've met Larry in person in Austin, and the guy's the sweetest guy. Like he means well. He's one of Elon's and Tesla's biggest supporters. So I just don't know how much Elon knew about Larry, but he's definitely a supporter.
Yeah, but even if he wasn't a supporter, I think the premise that was laid out by Larry is a very interesting one, because it's like, hey, the way you're doing this is very let's, for lack of a better word, let's call it unique, right? It's like it's you are sort of rocking the boat. You're doing it while you're heading these companies, right? But it's like very unorthodox and it's disruptive by nature. And so I'm curious, like, to hear y'all's take. Like, do you feel that same level of, like, do you think there is some sort of correlation between what I just described? Do you think this is par for the course? Do you guys think this is a completely different Elon Musk that we've seen in the past? I just kind of want to riff on that a little bit and see if you guys sort of agree with that sentiment or not.
Even just a few years ago, I remember Elon posting that he just didn't want to step into politics because it's sort of like a lose-lose, right? You're going to always piss someone off, and the net gain there is no net gain almost a lot of the times. And every single one of Elon's companies that he started has all been engineering focused. So when he bought X or Twitter, it was very different. It was social. It was a lot of emotions. It was very, very different from what he was used to with his other companies, more product and engineering focused. And we've also never had an owner or CEO of a social media company that isn't solely focused on products profits and revenue. He bought it because he wanted to support free speech and have a global town square to be able to support free speech. And so I think it's been really difficult for outsiders, especially maybe not huge Elon Musk supporters in the Muskonomy, to sort of understand why he did it and why he continues to say the things that he says. But at the end of the day, I think Elon is really driven by what is morally right, ethics. And if him doing the right thing means it's going to cost him a lot of money, he has no problem with that. And I think that's really hard to grasp for most people. He has so much money, but he doesn't really care about that. I think every single one of his companies, Tesla was for fighting climate change and pushing sustainable energy forward. SpaceX is to make life multiplanetary and push the boundaries of what we can do as a human species. Neuralink is to help disabled people. Boring companies to bring down traffic times, which we all hate traffic, right? It's to improve all of our lives in various ways. And I think that's sort of the goal of him buying X, was to improve life by enabling free speech for everybody.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the conversation that we had with Larry and, some of the the different aspects of his point. And I think to steelman what Larry was saying, that sometimes you can be more effective at accomplishing your goals if you are not straight through the front door about it, and if you work more strategically and less transparently. But that's just not who Elon is. Elon is very transparent, and for better or worse, like Elon takes a very smash mouth approach. And I feel like that is how he's handling this situation. And he does view it as existential, which, I think Larry agrees, that where social discourse was at was extremely unhealthy, that the basically structural lying that had become politically correct, and the normal way that a lot of these corporations operated was a huge existential threat to their survival, but then the survival of civilization as a whole. And that's why Elon felt like he had to get into this arena, is because it doesn't matter how great Tesla does or how great SpaceX does, if the United States crumbles over the next 2, 3, 4 decades, then that is something that is potentially a existential risk to all of humanity at this point in time. Just because we don't have, the world order as it exists is an American empire that is led by the United States, and disruption from that to whatever comes next definitely increases the risk that we get into, a global thermonuclear war or something like that. And those types of things are such huge potential, even if it's a small, say it's a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% chance likelihood that we have global thermonuclear warfare in the next 20 years, but the consequence of that is basically total annihilation of all of humanity. Well, that is a threat that you have to take seriously. Like, that's, if you have a 2% or 3% or 4% or 5% chance that your house is going to be destroyed every year, you definitely take out insurance on that house. And, I think that's the way that Elon is looking at this. And like I said, just from a personality standpoint, if that is his conclusion, he's going to take a very straight through the front door approach and try and move directly at the solution as quickly as he can. And for him, that's going to include leading from the front on speaking his mind, and not leaving the ability for other people to speak their minds just to everyone else, and kind of abdicating his own right to free speech in the process. Now, is that the only way to handle that? No, it is Elon's way, though. And I think that's something that, as supporters of Musk, we kind of just, you take the good with the bad, and I'm not saying that this is bad. I know that a lot of people will perceive it as bad, but like, he is the whole package, and all of the chaos that kind of comes along with Elon and the way he does things is part of how he accomplishes these things that are impossible. And so you can't really separate the one from the other. And so, I would say, chaotic good, definitely messy. And I think that people who have supported him in the past for everything that he's done to really make a dent on climate change, he aligned with their convictions around one particular risk, but I don't think that they have understood how seriously he takes all risks that he view as being that critical. And so I think their ability to feel that same level of motivation and drive to fix a problem on different types of risks is why, they feel so betrayed by him when the thing that he's identifying as a risk is something that they actually hold near and dear. So, as long as it's those, climate deniers that we're disrupting their dearly held beliefs, then go Elon. But like, as soon as the dearly held belief that we have that is potentially an existential risk to humanity is the thing that is being disrupted, well, now, that's a bridge too far. And I think that's just an interesting dynamic to watch play out, on social media, in the world, in discourse, in media traditionally. It's just fun.
So for those that are not familiar, Sawyer is one of the biggest accounts on the internet following sort of the Elon Musk economy, not just Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, electric vehicles as well. So Sawyer does like this sort of like an excellent job bringing breaking news and stories that relate to all of this on X. And I'm curious, since you have such a gigantic amount of influence, Sawyer, and reach, okay? So what do you hear? Like now, in this very interesting sort of arc of Musk, I think from like a documentation journalistic perspective, which I would call you a pretty high quality journalist, what are you seeing from let's say the traditional Musk base? I
think I've seen a lot more fracturing in recent years. I think as soon as 2021 or 2020, the whole community was pretty aligned with everything that Elon was doing and the companies and what they were doing. But I think once you start to enter in politics, I think you're naturally going to see some fracturing and some taking of sides. And certainly, I've seen from DMs and replies over the years that there are a lot of people that don't like what Elon is doing in terms of wading into politics because they feel like it potentially alienates a lot of potential Tesla customers. And I think there's some validity to that. But on the other hand, you have us as humans being a part of humanity, wanting what's good for humanity and recognizing the vision that Elon has with X and all of his other companies. And we sort of accept, like Hans said, so the good and the bad with this, right? I think there were downsides to Elon buying X for Tesla, but I think potentially long-term there could be some upsides too. But, like I said, if you wade into politics, you're going to alienate some customers. That's just going to happen. So you kind of just have to accept that as a Tesla investor.
Well, I was just going to say one thing that we didn't talk about with Larry that I think is relevant to bring in here is that once you reach a certain scale, like it doesn't matter if you're not interested in politics. Politics are interested in you. And if you are, and we saw that through all the FUD years in 2017, 2018, 2019, politics were definitely interested in Elon, and for the most part, he was able to just kind of stay away from it. But, you can only do that for so long. And that's, I think, another part of this whole dynamic is that at the level of scale that Tesla is now, but increasingly as they're going to become, a world leader in real world AI. And as the Tesla Optimus bot gets to be this transformative factor in global economic power and military might potentially, that you really just can't hide from the fact that there's going to be a lot of political ramifications to all of your actions, and you have to participate in that conversation.
I remember Walter Isaacson, who wrote Elon's biography. I remember him saying that, Elon's always looking for new challenges, right? Like he doesn't like to get bored because he feels like his mind just starts to go crazy, right? So he's always looking for harder and harder things to do. And at least with Tesla, things were really hard between that, 2017 to 2020 period. And I think as they started to get more and more profitable, especially into 2021, sales were hitting record revenue, profit. Things weren't necessarily I don't want to say they were easy, but they were certainly set up quite well for the future. And I think I don't want to say Elon got bored because I think he finds ways to interest himself. But I think X was a challenge, and he saw, I think, wokeism and free speech as a huge issue, and so he decided to buy Twitter.
I think his personal life, he I think with his interview with Jordan Peterson, it was interesting sort of how when he was discussing sort of his kid who transitioned from from a man to a woman. I think in his mind, it has hit him personally as well, right? And so even in that interview, it's like, I vowed to destroy the woke mind virus at that point, and I'm not debating right or wrong. I'm just trying to understand his approach, right? And so I think from his standpoint, it's doubly amplified because he feels like he has personally been impacted by this, right? Regardless of how you view that morally. And the complexity, though, the more I think about this, is that when you think about Tesla, SpaceX, the end results of these things are very quantifiable, right? So Tesla's a transition to sustainable energy. Great. So how do you measure that? By the reduction of carbon, let's say, in the atmosphere, and the number of electric vehicles and renewable energy sources that are, or the percentage of the total that is being generated or used globally. It's like a very hard and fast, nice formula you can write that says, I have been successful doing this, right? SpaceX, same thing. Percentage of total mass to orbit that's being leveraged, that we're getting there by using reusable rocket technology and the ability to go to Mars and have a self-sustaining civilization there. Super easy goal. Easy meaning it's relatively easy to define. But then with X, right, the goal feels a little bit more gray. So it's free speech, these ideologies have to go, but it's on the spectrum of morality, right? And I think in this time it's hard to distinguish, at least it's difficult to distinguish what things that people have decided are morally right or wrong are actually morally right or wrong, or it's more of a political ideology because of what media has done to our civilization, let's say mainstream media for the last 2 decades or plus, of controlling the narratives and controlling how people are fed information and capitalizing on the internet age of maximizing click-through by creating the most salacious and scary headlines possible, right? So I feel like I think it's become cloudy for people to gauge if he's on a successful mission. Right. But on the flip side, to Hans's point, if you think about the Tesla arc between 2017 and 2020, so the political nature is okay, yeah, it was clear for people that wanted global, that wanted climate change to be stopped, and they wanted the Earth to be in a more healthier place and having more sustainable energy. For those people following the story, it seemed like very clear goals. But then you had the flip side of those EVs are not even sustainable. They catch fire. They use cobalt, and they're terrible for people. And they're lying about all this stuff, right? So it's I don't know. It's just such a weird time. It's such a weird time, and yeah, such a weird time.
I think another reason for Elon wading into politics, I think his experience with his child was one of the reasons. I think another reason is sort of the Biden administration purposely going out of their way to not only ignore the progress and the contributions of Tesla to the American economy and to sustainable energy, the goals there, but the lack of recognition in Starlink and the SpaceX and all of his other companies, in that, imagine you're Elon, you've helped create hundreds of thousands of jobs, American jobs, through Tesla. You revolutionize an industry, and you get the cold shoulder for a technology that Biden wanted to make a main point in his administration for his climate goals. And then, the previous 2 UAW presidents who Biden really supports unions and certainly the UAW very strongly. They went to jail for corruption, and the current one is being investigated for corruption. And in 2021, when Biden was saying all these things to GM's Mary Barra about, oh, you're the leader in EVs, you led Mary and it mattered, the famous line, there was one clear leader in EVs, and that was Tesla. And Tesla is a great American company and ran by one of the greatest entrepreneurs ever. And I think for Tesla to do so much for the American, they make the number 1 most American made car. I mean, no one talks about that. People still think the Ford F-150 or whatever is the most American made. And those only have 30-something% North American made parts. So I think it was a combination of things, the wokeism concerns from him, the free speech concerns, the Biden issue. I think there was a whole host of factors for him waiting into politics, and ultimately he ended up deciding he needed to purchase Twitter.
And I think one of the points we were talking about earlier too is like, as Tesla and SpaceX and X become more profitable, more influential, have more power, Elon becomes wealthier and wealthier because of his percentage stake in these companies. And the closer he gets to first trillionaire ever, I feel like this is just the beginning. I feel like, and it's sort of that's to Hans's point too, is like he has almost no choice to become political, because in order to protect his ventures, regardless of how people view those ventures, right, good or bad, right, he will likely be attacked viciously, just like anybody else in the history of humankind is attacked viciously, simply by having power and influence, right, by government entities and so on and so forth. And so in his mind, maybe he feels like, well, if I don't get political now and start really putting myself in a position where I can protect my ventures, then they're just going to come and railroad me. And I think that's another reason why he bought X, is because he wanted to make sure he had a voice. Because if you think about, like think about the stuff that he posts now, or like the things that are being shared online, let's say, some of it which I think is not based in let's say in the same sort of rigor that he would use on an engineering perspective, but it's social, right? But it's still free speech, so I support his ability to do that. But I'm like, I disagree with what you're saying. How much freedom would he have had to do that if he wouldn't have had X, which kind of has the same rule for him than for everybody else, right? Meaning, like, could there have been a chance that those things would have been suppressed, and then you would continue on this path of having censorship and things like that in social media that would prevent some of these stories from coming forward? And if that's the case, then long term, his influence to be able to voice his opinion or say get what he wants to get done would be suppressed by those systems. And so, which wouldn't allow him to get what he wants done. And I wonder how much of that is also in play with the X purchase. But I mean, this is just all, I don't know,
it's
just
interesting
theorizing.
It's going to be interesting to see how X evolves as a business, because a lot of his other businesses are really more hardware based. They incorporate software, FSD, we all know that. But X is very different in that they've really needed advertisers to help keep things going, right? And obviously they have a lot of issues going on. We just saw today they filed a lawsuit against a big alliance or whatever. I forget the acronym.
GARM or something.
Yeah. But I think that's why they wanted more people to, sign up for subscriptions, and they're filing for money transmitter licenses to be able to expand their ways to be able to generate revenue. But we'll see if it's enough.
I was thinking, there's a reason that Jeff Bezos owns, an entire media corporation. And it's, I think, for very similar reasons that, once you get to a certain level, you have to it's just owning the means of distribution for your voice instead of going through a third party. And, this is not uncommon at this level of influence. And I think it is important. And, it's hard to say, running the counterfactual, if we had not received the Twitter files, I think a lot of people said that the things that were revealed in the Twitter files were things that were happening. But that was a very niche thing to say. I think it was probably understood more widely, but it wasn't something that was commonly said out loud in public, outside of, some smaller circles. But for that to basically be now common knowledge and the de facto, consensus view of what our Justice Department, our three-letter agencies were doing in relationship to social discourse, does that happen without the Twitter files and Elon's purchasing of X? Like, just think about the amount of legal pushback that he got. Every lawyer in the world when he bought that was telling him, no, you are not opening up all of these old files and allowing journalists to crawl through them and unearth God knows what for God knows why. And, you're putting everything at risk and there's potential liability out the wazoo. So for him to have the boldness to A, purchase it in the first place, and then B, to just share that information so openly, there was no one else in the world who was going to do that. And I think that in and of itself was a huge win for humanity, because, I think that authoritarianism as a whole, like we keep talking about how we need to defend democracy, all the while embracing the tactics of dictators to do it. And that is a very, very real and existential threat to our civilization. And I think that he was right to do it. And then, going back to your point, Farzad, about trying to understand Elon and how he ticks and why he operates in that way. I think the conversation with Jordan Peterson was also revealing when he talked about, sometimes you just need to punch the bully in the face. And it's not that you want to fight, but you have to be willing to make the first move and be very clear. And that's why I use the term smash mouth. You have to take a smash mouth approach to dealing with bullies sometimes, and not just sometimes, oftentimes. And I think that is he has grown up his entire life with that philosophy, because he learned it literally in the school of hard knocks as a child, had it beat into him. And, that's something that at this stage of his life, he's not going to change. We've got 50 plus years of this operating philosophy that has served him very well up to this point. The likelihood that he's going to shift course on that now is very, very low.
I'd be curious to get this is a little off topic, but I'd be curious to get your guys' thoughts on this. Obviously there are a lot of Tesla supporters that have supported the brand for a long time, and they would consider themselves Democrats. And they haven't liked how much Elon has waded into politics. And of course, we've seen, partly because of the Biden stuff and the wokeism and a lot of other things, Elon is supporting Republicans right now quite heavily, publicly endorsed Donald Trump. And in the past, Elon is on the other side of that spectrum, publicly supporting, or at least voting for, Democrats. Do you guys think, there's a lot of people that say that even though he might be losing some Democratic supporters based on the political views that he's sharing, he's gaining new ones because he's reaching out to Republicans. Tucker Carlson, he gave him a Cybertruck, and Tucker Carlson's post yesterday with the Cybertruck review got 30 million views. Do you think that the potential influx of new Republican supporters or EV buyers is outweighing any potential Democratic support or EV potential purchase losses, I guess?
I think that's a very interesting theory. And I definitely, so I've personally seen a very large number of my audience, very large number, net number of audience, but as a percentage is tough to gauge. But I'm seeing so many comments from hey, Republican would have never supported EVs, and but I support Tesla and Elon, and I bought my Model 3. I bought my Model Y because I support what he says, right? So I think there's definitely an uptick in the, let's say, on the other side of the political spectrum of people wanting to buy his products. I think that Tucker Carlson, that is such a uniquely brilliant approach of getting exposure to your product, because what I think what you said of, there's definitely people on the left side of the political spectrum that have abandoned Tesla, either for political reasons, but also for moral reasons, because they just don't feel like he's a good person. And typically speaking, in the society that we live right now, a lot of people that can afford to make that decision with their wallet happen to be on they're sort of the coastal elite kind of folks that can't afford to make those decisions, right, from a moral perspective. But I still feel like these two are the minority. I still feel like this is a 5 to 10% of the population, 20% max, super maximum. It's probably honestly single digits that
most are in the middle and just don't really pay attention to this.
They don't care, man. It's when I talk to people, is like the whole Disney debacle, like, or like Bud Light, for example, these giant PR disasters, let's say on either, like let's say on that side of the political spectrum. It's like people were like so upset about Disney, running their movies a certain way, and Bud Light being, pro LGBTQ and the way they sort of ran their ad campaigns and stuff. And it was a giant sort of media like hate storm on these things and people going crazy. Those brands are fine. It's like, okay, a little bit, in the short term, a little bit of revenue loss, a little bit of people left the company. And these are gigantic companies that have a lot of influence. People are still going to Disney. Like, I think ultimately people just want to be happy, and people want the best bang for their buck, and they want their family to have a good time, and they don't want to be worried about that stuff. They're just worried about like having a good life. And they're not really necessarily worried about what other people think of them when they own this product. The people that can afford to do that have, in my opinion, have the time to be able to worry about that. Most people either don't got the time to worry about that, or they choose not to spend the time doing that. They'd rather worry about other stuff. And social media, I think, is so good at amplifying those extremes, because that's what really drives the, ooh, you know what I'm saying? Like, wow, that's a crazy thing. Like, I can't believe that's happening. Let me look more into it. But most people don't even care. I think long term, and I throw it to Hans here, I think long term, this is probably a net positive. This whole craziness, it's a net positive, because the amount of eyeballs that are now following this individual and this story is massive. It's massive. And before this, let's say like for Tesla specifically, I'm talking about Tesla specifically, electric vehicles, what were they seen? And this was very political. Rich, green toys. Right? It's for the rich, it's for the green people, and it's just, who cares? Like, a bunch of hippies are buying these things.
Coastal elites, sort of.
Exactly, And now the coastal elites, yeah, exactly. And now the coastal elite are saying, oh, it's not the MAGA hat. It's now the MAGA hat. But guess what? Now it's both. It also has the sustainable angle. It's just the people that are really worried about how they look driving this stuff, right, are ditching it for brands like Rivian or Lucid, let's say, or BMW and Mercedes, because they want to feel good. It's less about like buying the product for the merits. It's more about buying the product based on how they feel. But very few people make purchasing decisions based on that, I find.
Yeah, I think the key point that you make is the one about just percentages of people. And, I think on the flip side, like, there's probably 5 or 10% on the other end of the spectrum who are it's going to be really long time before they would ever even consider buying an EV, because they're just so anti everything EV. And like, those are going to be hard people to win over. But I think expanding out of that, initial, very enthusiastic core group of early adopters to really the segment to pay attention to is the big squishy middle segment, and just sounding like a normal, reasonable person. And this was something that I felt like Elon himself did a good job of, even when it came to commentary around climate change. He's like, yeah, I'm not like super worried about climate change like next year, the year after, or the next 10 years. Like, I think it is something to be worried about. I think it's a silly experiment to run forever. I think we are going to have to do this eventually, so why not start now? But he was never real polarizing in his commentary around climate change, and that being the motivation for why he was building Tesla. And so that, when people listen to what he has to say about that, who are the more squishy middle types who don't necessarily care about that issue as much, then he sounds a lot more reasonable compared to a lot of the other people that they've heard pushing, like, you have to drive an EV today, otherwise you're, sacrificing your children's future. Just the sensational aspect of all of that. But then when you listen to him on a whole other range of topics, and he comes across as like, hey, like pretty sensical, common sense, logical, middle of the road perspectives on a lot of things. And I think that that's the vast majority of Americans hold positions that are more aligned with that. And so the more they can hear his commentary, apart from the crazy versions of commentary on either side around what it is that he's doing, that broad mass appeal will far outweigh, any people on the fringes that get alienated and decide not to purchase those products.
I think most people that buy Tesla buy it because it's the best product. It's the safest, got the best technology. Unfortunately, not enough people know about it and know how good it is. That's a whole nother discussion. But yeah, I don't think they're doing it to make like a political stance or anything. I think they just like, oh, I really like this product, I'm gonna get it.
And so here's a thought experiment for y'all. Do you think that even those people who are very anti-Tesla, let's fast forward into,
I know where you're going.
2029, 2030, when you've got like robo-taxis that are incredible robo-taxis that are zipping all over the major cities, New York, LA, San Francisco, Phoenix, Austin, all these major metropolitan areas, and they cost half as much or 20% of what it costs to take an Uber, and they're downtown for something and they need to get from here to there. Whether it's a Republican who hates EVs or someone who's a green person who now hates Elon, like, is either one of those people going to not take the Tesla robotaxi so that they can have an old school Uber or a yellow cab?
No, they're going to choose the cheap option every time. Like, I don't know. Every time, history has shown, consumers have shown they're going to go with the cheapest option, no matter what that is.
This is like the Jeff Bezos example I've used on this channel multiple times. Is like, remember when Jeff Bezos was constantly painted as, and this was before he bought his media publication, he was painted as the evil rich billionaire that hates his workers, and he is the worst person in the world, and he's a slave, his slave owner, basically, right? How many of those people never use Amazon? You're telling me people don't use like everybody? I haven't met a person yet that doesn't use Amazon. Okay, it's the value for money and the convenience is second to none. And so as long as the company can offer that from a product perspective, and this is such a crazy, insane sort of overlap of technology and societal. This story is so. I don't know how this isn't the most fascinating story on the world right now. Like what's happening here, but. The 8-camera system with the inference compute and the AI training compute at the headquarters will allow Tesla to have the lowest cost per mile solution by far, right? And so that is what enables someone like an Elon, I think, to have the confidence to do this because he knows like people are going to use my product anyway. I don't care. Like do whatever you want. He even said it on that New York Times Summit interview. Is like, do you want the best product or not? To Sora Han's point, do you want the best product or not? And then here's another thought experiment. Okay, I was thinking about this at like 2:00 in the morning while I was feeding my 9-week-old. Okay, so once the bot comes to fruition, and the bot works, let's say it works. Okay, what does the bot imply? The bot implies a humanoid form robot that will be able to help you to do stuff around the house. Okay, at a much lower cost per hour than a human would. Are those same people that hate Elon Musk choose to employ humans to do the same exact thing when they could use the human or robot? And now you have this sort of dynamic of like, oh, look, all these people that could be using a robot at a much lower cost per mile and sort of free up the people that are working in these jobs to do something else, let's say. They're like, no, I want to hire a human. I have to have a human working for me and helping me around the house. I can't hire the robot, right? And like, think about what dynamic that puts in the next 10 to 20 years. You have these people that have to hire humans to do the job for them instead of using human or robots, right? And that's like a weird one to think about because it's like, all right, what's the connotation of like a human hiring another human when they don't have to, right? I don't know. It's just fascinating to think about.
There are definitely people that are going to be like, I feel morally wrong, like getting a robot to do this. I got to hire a human. I got to support my own species. There are probably going to be people like that. By the way, you're right about the Amazon thing. Like there are 100% people that were like on Prime Day, like, oh, I hate Bezos, screw his $500 million yacht on X, and then go, oh, look, Prime Day deals. Let me go buy something.
Yeah. But I think, the variable though is that Tesla has to have that no-brainer product, And I mean, I would argue they already do. And to your point, like people don't know, like it's still a major, or people can't afford. I think it definitely is both.
That's
I think
Elon's take, yeah. Affordability, that's a real issue.
Yeah, the awareness on the affordability, I mean, like I now drive a 2018 Tesla Model 3 with full self-driving that I bought out the door after the EV tax credit for $21,500. Like, the vast majority of car buyers can afford a roughly $20,000 car. And the more of these things that we get out on the road, the older the fleet gets, or the older that the oldest cars in the fleet get, the more affordable that price gets to be. And, we're still on the cusp of potentially a sub $30,000 brand new Tesla. And so, we're really getting to that point now where people can have access to these things that they just don't even realize that those deals are available to be had. I mean, like, you can even sometimes find these types of deals directly from Tesla. There was one that I saw, I think 2 weeks ago, that was a red, 2018 Model 3 with a little under 100,000 miles on it with FSD that was sold in Minnesota for a price that was eligible for the tax credit, assuming the buyer was eligible for it. I think it was 23.5 or something to that effect. So yeah, like people just don't understand that if you want to experience that it's much more in reach than it has been in the past and that people realize today.
That's where I think at least a small amount of advertising spend makes sense to make interesting, fun ads. I think the way they did it, they experimented with it last year, was a little bit more cookie cutter, like just sort of dry, not sort of the Tesla style that we've come to expect with their marketing. And I don't think they took that same unique creative approach with their advertising. And I don't know if Elon will ever try again. Elon said they're advertising a little bit during their Q2 earnings call. I don't see them. I don't hear about people that have seen them. But I think it's worth going out there. Like, for instance, the person who cuts my hair, she drives 30,000 miles a year. And if she were to drive an EV, I calculated, she'd be saving tons and tons of money over years. And I showed her the prices of a Model 3 on the website, including the EV tax credit, which she would qualify for. And she was blown away by how inexpensive they've become over the recent years. They thought they were $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 vehicles, when you can get a Model Y in the 30s brand new right now if you include the incentives. But very, very few people know about that. And the state incentives too, like as you just said. You combine state incentives with federal, it gets pretty nutty.
I think there will be, I agree with 1,000% with you. I think their advertising efforts, let's say, needed or not, have been very traditional. And I'll use the word uninspired, to be honest. Like it's unlike Tesla to do something like everybody else, right? Like that's why the brand is what it is. It's because they are mavericks in a way, I think they would be very well served if they took a page out of Coca-Cola's advertising strategy that they did with the Super Bowl, or Budweiser's approach that they did with the Super Bowl, where it's just like once a year, you have this like this almost like art piece that they put on the time of the year where most eyeballs are watching something, and they kind of like talk about why their brand is great, right? Like, why doesn't Tesla's entire advertising budget should be once a year during the Super Bowl, during the ad slot where most people are watching the game, which I think is the first break after the game starts, I believe, if I remember correctly, whatever that slot is, just pay the price, 50 million, whatever the money is, just once a year, and just make the most fucking badass 60 to 90 second piece about why your brand is so incredible and how cheap it is. Just once a year. And I bet you that one ad will go further than anything else, because people will take that, they'll share it online, blah, blah, blah. It will live, people will turn it into other pieces of content. Like, I think that strategy is 1,000 times better than whatever they're doing now.
I was going to say, I think one reason Elon doesn't right now want to go sort of all in on advertising is because I think even though Tesla's car sales business makes up the majority of their revenue, I don't think he views that as the future of Tesla, car sales directly to consumers. I think later this year, once he saw the progress of FSD 12, he was like, we're going all in on robotaxi. That's the future of Tesla. And notice how we don't really hear about the 20 million vehicles per year goal anymore from Tesla. They don't state that in their documents. They don't talk about it on their earnings calls anymore, because I think they're moving away from that being a main focus and going all in on robotaxi, Optimus, and the other businesses that they feel like are much larger opportunities than the vehicle sales business.
Okay, that's a very interesting take. So are you in the camp that they will not sell cars anymore once they have it fully solved?
No, I think they still will, but I just don't know if they're going to get to that 20 million per year level that they wanted to originally a few years ago. I think it'll be less than that, because I think there were going to be so many robo-taxis on the road potentially that most people won't need to own cars. I think that's the take of Elon. But I'm of the camp that I would like them to continue to come out with new, cheaper vehicle models and be able to expand, the potential base of their fleet. And it sounds like they're going to do that to some degree next year. They said they have more affordable vehicles coming, but it's sort of unclear what those are, or if it's just a refreshed why, or sort of unclear what that means.
I do think that if they're able to lower the cost per mile by half or more because they're removing the driver, and you think about like what a self-driving car turns into, he's talked about room on wheels, right? So like, it's like you kind of change what it means to move from point A to point B. I think the market for that is probably 10 to 100 times bigger than whatever we deem transportation today. So I still feel like, because you imagine like getting from point A to point B, especially in places where you don't walk, like it has transformed. It's like, it's a completely different way of thinking about it. And the cost of doing that is way cheaper than it is today. And so how many people are going to take that on? I feel like the TAM for that is going to explode. So I still feel like 20 million a year is maybe not 2030, let's say, maybe 2032, maybe 2033.
I think they could do it if they have a sufficient vehicle lineup. I just think they just need more models than they do right now to get there.
I think that they will continue to sell vehicles, but I actually think that the prices are going to rise. Like in Elon's mind, the way that this works is clearly that the Tesla network is the only place that the vehicle gets to operate as a robotaxi, and there's obviously a revenue share component to that. And so if there is a Tesla that's operating as a robotaxi, that Tesla is earning revenue on those rides, regardless of whether that's owned by an individual or a fleet operator. But I think the market dynamics pretty quickly favor economies of scale that will be achieved by fleet operators. And I think that there will be people that are going around and buying up not only the new inventory that Tesla is selling into the market, but potentially even a lot of individuals' vehicles, just because, it's much easier to operate profitably at large scale than it is onesie twosie. And that gap will drive the, the growth of these fleets. And I think that's where we'll end up in the long term, is with groups of large fleets operated by, not necessarily Tesla, that become the owners of most of these vehicles, and the individual ownership of Teslas will go down. And not necessarily that that's going to be forced, but that's just going to be what kind of naturally emerges from the market dynamics.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's like, that becomes, you think about owning a fleet, like say a rental car business today, like a Hertz. You need a lot of capital and sort of free cash flow to kind of get that going, and your profit margins are not that great. When in a world where the cost per mile of these transport systems are so low, and the net cost of purchasing these things are actually significantly lower, and you think about what is the dynamic of having a nice car today versus a nice robotaxi like in 5-10 years time, it's a completely different equation, right? You can have why do people buy Mercedes? Why do people drive in these cars? Is because it's really nice inside, right? It's really nice inside for the whole vehicle. But then when 90% of trips are one or two people, you can probably have a very nice interior for the same cost as a Toyota Corolla in a self-driving car that would match $150,000 Mercedes, And so like the equation changes completely, And so my point there was it becomes a lot cheaper to be a fleet provider, to the point where even an individual can become a fleet provider. They'll just have 2 or 3 self-driving robotaxis, and perhaps each one is outfitted differently. One is for work, one is for leisure, one is for going to the club or whatever, and they become more specialized in nature. I don't know, just thinking out loud. I'm not really sure if that's going to be the case or not, but
well, that's definitely possible. The things that I'm thinking about that are much easier to do at fleet scale are washing the vehicles both outside and inside, and all of your charging infrastructure and some of the ancillary services. But you could even see businesses that pop up around just servicing individual owners who are the providers of the vehicles, but then they're basically kind of like a co-op fleet of sorts, where the co-op then does some of those types of things for the owners. That way it is really hassle free for them, which that would be a very interesting future as well, and one that I definitely wouldn't be opposed to.
What's the biggest story you're tracking right now, Sawyer?
I think everyone's just sort of waiting anticipation for this next big FSD update this month, where we're supposed to get actually Smart Summon, and the Cybertruck's supposed to get FSD. That's going to be a large vehicle to be self-driving. That'll be interesting. And of course, all the hardware. 3 owners are waiting for FSD 12.5. So I think that's probably what most people have their eye on this month.
Do you think hardware 3 will be able to be added to the robotaxi as a self-driving car that will generate revenue for the owner?
I mean, Elon's alluded to that being the case, so I think so. For now, I'll say yes, but it does seem like they're wanting to move away from being able to support both hardware 3 and hardware 4, because sounds like it is difficult to continue to support both.
I forgot to ask this to Larry. I've been asking all the Tesla peeps this question because it's like I'm leaning towards no. I'm leaning towards no because I think what I've seen in the past, and I think they have ways to solve it though. Like we've talked on the podcast that, so just upgrade the hardware, just put a hardware 4 in there. Big deal. Or, get an inference compute that can do it, like you don't have that many.
Do you charge the consumers for that, or do you cover it for them?
I think as goodwill, they should eat the cost, because if you really think about the net revenue generation and profit generation of a self-driving car, it's in Tesla's best interest to put a self-driving computer in every single Tesla they own, if it's capable of doing so with some sort of upgrade, because the cost benefit analysis would tell you that's you should do that.
I think you put a credit card on file, and as long as you contribute it for at least 200 miles of robotaxi or something, then they cover the cost. But if not, then maybe several months down the road, then you get charged for it if you're not providing it as a robotaxi.
I think legally they won't have to, because I think the company has said enough, and sort of Elon has said enough that's they don't really have to do that. But I do know that a lot of people that have owned Teslas that I've spoken to operate under the assumption that the hardware 3 cars would be able to be added to the robotaxi fleet. But I don't know.
I think in 2019 they changed some sort of language on the website. They made it legally, like in the future, it won't be Tesla's problem if it doesn't do certain things or doesn't achieve like robotaxi. But if you look at what they said it would achieve under the FSD box, I think it's already done doing
almost all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and for the record, on the panel, Farzad and I are split on this. I think it's like 80 or 90% likely that hardware 3 will be able to be added to the Tesla network and earn money. Like to me, it's almost. It's highly, highly, highly unlikely that is not the case.
Long term, it's inconsequential. I think, because you think you go to 2030, what percentage of the fleet will be hardware 4 plus? Like 90%. So plus, right? So it doesn't really matter within that scope. But there is a percentage of the, because I get DMs, I get replies, I see my comments. Like there are people out there that feel a little uneasy because they don't really know what to do. They're like, okay, I have a hardware 3 car, should I upgrade to hardware 4? And I think if Elon leaves it gray, right, and Tesla leaves it gray, then you have an incentive for people to upgrade their cars, which means more cars sold, right? And then they're like, okay, yeah, actually we can do hardware 3. Then all of a sudden it's like a win-win regardless for Tesla. But I think there will be hardware 3 customers that are like, yo, what the hell, right? Like you were a little bit, but I think this is like one of the downsides of Elon being chronically optimistic, because he creates these sort of environments where it's like, okay, but now what? And I think the people on the Elon bad side will say this is premeditated. He is misleading on purpose because he's a terrible person. And I take the other side, which is like, no, he's just an ambitious person. And if you're buying into the brand, unfortunately, you'll be subject to these sort of things, but it's up to the individual and the group of people to decide if they have the right to let's say, right or wrong, right? But long term, as somebody who follows a company, who's an investor, like, it doesn't matter. Truly, it doesn't matter.
I'm in that
but
camp too.
Yeah, but there will be pain in the short term if hardware 3 doesn't support robotaxi, let's say.
I feel like a lot of Tesla owners have this unrealistic expectation. Tesla should always offer retrofits just for everything. Like, I remember when the Model 3 got like cooled seats, they're like, so when are you going to offer retrofits? I'm like, you can't just
that's different.
You can't just be retrofitting everything forever, you know?
1,000%. Yeah, that I think that's unrealistic. I think the reason why hardware 3 is an interesting conundrum is because 1 million robotaxis by 2020. That's the conundrum, right? Like it. So that's when people are like, "Yo, my car is not robotaxi. What the heck?" I think that's a super valid sort of thing that Tesla will have to navigate through. But again, long term, I don't think it's a big deal.
I think Elon's optimism does cause some Tesla owners to be upset about certain things, but it pushes his teams like to the max to be able to accomplish things that just other companies don't.
1,000%. Yeah. And that existential drive to get stuff done, he's also employing with X. But it's like he's employing it with the users of the platform, which is such an interesting dynamic. It's like the same type of existential culture that he built with SpaceX and Tesla that I've experienced firsthand. It feels exactly the same as somebody who's supportive of X. There's no difference. And I find that endlessly fascinating. Okay, we're at time, Sawyer. I know you got to go. Where can people find you, Sawyer? Tell us. Where can people find you?
I guess just at Sawyer Merritt on X. That's sort of the place to be, right? That's where I am.
That's the place to be. Make sure you go check him out. He does great coverage of Tesla, EVs, SpaceX, the Musk economy. Fantastic follow. Sawyer Merritt on X. Thank you, Sawyer.
Thanks,
Appreciate
guys.
you, brother. All right. Let's end recording here.